When Darwin discovered that all life forms on Earth are descendants of earlier organisms, one should think that an obvious question to ask would be, what new sort of life forms will humans eventually mutate into? Or more pessimistically, if we ourselves don't advance, where else do we find any candidate organisms who with the necessary mutations will outdistance us and take over the role as the most dominant species on Earth? However, with a few exceptions, as you will hear more about in Laura Søsø's lesson 2, this question has rarely been part of the Darwinian agenda, perhaps because it seems comfortably far away in the future. More importantly, Darwinians are usually biologists, and biologists haven't been prone to admit that culture increasingly interferes in biological evolution. Perhaps so much so that the true followers of humans will be more a product of culture-infiltrated nature, maybe even of pure technology, than of evolution in the wild. Since the 1990s, it has thus been widely discussed if we are somehow entering what could be termed a post-human condition. A condition in which technology interacts with the human body to such a pervasive degree that this body is transformed into a cyborg, an amalgamation of flesh and artifacts transcending the purely human, or even a condition in which technology completely outdistances humans and organisms, be it through synthetic biology, machine-based artificial intelligence, or something which we now can't imagine. In its most tangible version, this vision may still sound futuristic, but the question arises if its basic characteristics, such as the radical mingling of artifacts and body blurring the boundaries between human subject and what can no longer be seen as merely inorganic supplements and surroundings, hasn't in fact been with us for quite some time. In this introductory lecture to post-human aesthetics, I will use visual art as a guiding instrument for exploring this question, seeing avant-garde movements as symptoms for post-human tendencies in society more broadly. To do so implies moving out to a somewhat larger historiographical scale than has been usual in the human sciences recently, exploring a post-human grand narrative that in a syncretic way bridges the divide between natural and human sciences and between evolutionary and rhizomatic modes of genesis. This perspective first allows you to see the obvious contexts for the post-human in art. Artistic trends that explicitly integrate high-tech elements such as bioart, robot art, and digital art. But even more, it reveals that these trends seem only to be the tip of the iceberg for a larger trend, since modernism and the avant-gardes in general are haunted, indeed defined by, what you may term an alienating non-human presence, a strangeness problematizing the humanist visual language, naturalism in myriad ways. Cut up and recombined figures, non-figurative spaces, asphalt sliding down over rocks, exploding machines, empty galleries, are just a short sample of an infinite repertoire of artistic ingredients that distort, mock, or wholly displace a dignified human figure and its perception as a central actant in art. Luckily for this extended reading of the post-human in art, it is not just now that art theorists have discerned inhuman tendencies in modern art. From futurists like Marinetti to Ortega y Gasset, Adorno, Hans Sedlmayr, and Jack Burnham, observers have in different ways remarked that modern art indeed concerns a movement away from humanism. Moreover, this extended historiographical frame, more or less simultaneous with the Industrial Revolution, makes it irrelevant to compare and indeed fuse the post-human with another paradigm for complete nature artifact interlacing, namely the Anthropocene, the idea of a new geological age in which the planet for the first time is irreversibly changed by human technological intervention. Whatever theoretical framing we choose, it is important to admit the permanent shock of the new, our continuous ignorance of what the post-human future actually will look like. With the main feature being its interpretative openness, avant-garde art therefore takes part in making visible something fundamentally unknown and permanently becoming. Its only sure characteristic being its anti-anthropocentric. Interpreted in its most strict sense, the post-human concerns a graspable transformation of the human body, together with animal bodies and plants. Through technologies such as gene modification, prosthetics, nanorobotics, drug medicine, and diverse sorts of information technologies, our body here becomes the last frontier of vaginal nature, finally giving over to cultural colonization. Whereas the human project of culture so far has consisted in transforming the nature around us into artifacts and only superficially influencing human anatomy with cultural techniques, such as language and corporeal training for diverse work disciplines. Now culture seriously penetrates the inner regions of the body, promising to pervasively interact with and change our organs, nerves, cells, and molecules. Posited as it still is on the brink of the future, the post-human field has tended to be split between utopian and dystopian visions. On the most jubilantly utopian side, we find transhumanists such as Nick Bostrom, Max More, and Julian Savulescu, who can't wait to implement the brave new post-human technologies and shift our medical ethics from one of repair to one of enhancement. On the dystopian side, we meet cautious conservatives such as Michael Sandel and the former neoliberal philosopher Francis Fukuyama, who thinks that there's an inscrutable complexity in human nature, the so-called Factor X, which you shouldn't mess around with through technological fixes like drugs or genetic modification. However, in the huge gray zone between these extremes, there are also diverse forms of critical posthumanism, represented by, for instance, Catherine Hayles, Carrie Wolf, Rosie Braidotti, and Stefan Herbrechter, that call for a curious but inquisitive attitude, in which you carefully examine the phenomena termed posthuman without judging them according to any pre-given normativity, except sustaining the observation already done by the feminist philosopher of science, Donna Haraway, concerning cyborgs, that the posthuman breaks down all sorts of dualisms, apart from the obvious machine-organism and human-animal, also mind-body, man-woman, active-passive, life-death, and consciousness world. Looking for the post-human in art, the first and perhaps most obvious focus will be recent tendencies that concretely point to technological modifications of organisms. Apart from contemporary art generally alluding to monstrous, fragmented, alienated, and cloned human bodies, such as, for instance, the Chapman brothers' run-amok genetic experiments, or Patricia Piccinini's sculptures combining human and animal forms. The art movements most often linked to the post-human field are thus recent artistic tendencies that more or less explicitly engage with advanced technology and its interference in or simulation of bodies and plants. Bioart, robot art, and digital art, from Stellar's experiments with robotic prostheses to Hollande's plastic surgical body modifications to Symbiotica's rebuilding of living tissue to Eduardo Katz's transgenic art. Although these arts, like arts in more traditional media, operate in a space that might be called fictional, they employ actors, procedures, and techniques known from real life, including perhaps especially the microscopic worlds of its functional and utilitarian domains. Thus, in the field of bioart, understood in its most extensive sense, we typically meet a confrontation where cold and hard high-tech computer and robotic equipment interacts with warm and soft real living matter from whole bodies to animal tissue, plants and bacteria. as for instance in MeArt, in which electrical signals from brain neurons in rats are translated into digital signals that make two robot arms perform what is normally reserved to humans, namely drawings on paper, thereby questioning what constitutes subjectivity, agency, and creativity. We here get a feeling that the materials of life are just as malleable and manipulable as clay, marble, or paint, and that therefore the artists, like the biotechnologicians whose work they question, expand, and twist, have entered the domain that was earlier reserved to God and later biological evolution, namely creation, genesis of actual new life forms. And isn't it that what the post-human is about? Technological intervention in evolution, both our own and that of other organisms, a leveling out of different artifact organism together with the differences between human, animal, and plants. The artist who probably has given the most explicitly post-human framing of his art, and certainly the earliest one, is the Australian performance artist Stelarc. According to the very articulate and explicitly post-human discourse with which Stelarc surrounds his performances, integrating artificial limbs, prostheses, and links to the internet, our technological environment has grown beyond our natural capabilities, and our only option for keeping pace with it is to modify ourselves through the same technologies, treating our bodies with an engineering approach. As he provocatively claims, the body is obsolete and should have its organs replaced as if they were components in a machine, an idea he, for instance, explores through linkage to a metallic third hand. Although feminist observers have been worried about a male fantasy of corporeal transcendence and machine victory over the flesh, Stelarc's discourse and performances are profoundly marked by material embedding and also diverge from transhumanist ego realization through his ideas of voluntarily giving off some of your subjectivity to alien forces mediated by the internet. In a performance series like The Pink Body, half of his body was remote controlled by collective impulses from the internet and involuntarily activated through electrodes, making his left arm and leg move, recalling Luigi Galvani's late 18th century experiments with moving the limbs of a dead frog through electrical impulses. But as said earlier, in my own research into post-human aspects of avant-garde art, I ask if these recent monstrous or high technological trends are actually only the tip of a much larger iceberg. If the post-human isn't in fact a pervasive alien influence in all of that art which we label modern, that is, avant-garde and modernist art, emerging in the beginning of the last century. A defining characteristic of modern art is indeed that it is in some way or the other strange, alienated from everyday human experience as we have come to know it since the Renaissance. And my suggestion is that this pervasive strangeness indeed concerns an alienation from being human in the humanist sense and an exploration of alternative modes of being and perceiving than those offered by an autonomous human mind placed in a just as autonomous human body. Instead of having the rest of the world decently removed to a background, a scene or panorama placed at an appropriate distance from the sphere of autonomous human action, modern art explores the millions of ways we are penetrated or displaced by the lesser organized, chaotic, or more strictly ordered parts of the world, from the subconscious to the unruly parts of the body, from machinic cognition to the inorganic parts of the non-human world, and the ways we are hereby transformed into something else, something post-human. Very explicit examples of such an extended genealogy of the post-human in art are, for instance, found in the early 20th century among the futurists who adored the machines and their possibilities of prolonging, transforming, and in the end, immortalizing our bodies. Watch, for instance, Boccioni's Cyborg, halfway absorbed into the dynamical four-dimensional space it traverses. But in fact, we don't have to move to explicitly technological settings in order to experience this effect. With the hindsight of the very post-human modifications made by, for instance, Aziz and Kocher in their digitally modified photographs, a Danish modernist such as Wilhelm Lundstrøm loses his comfortably humanist aura of formalism. Here it becomes understandable in a surprisingly literate sense that the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset could characterize abstraction as the dehumanization of art. I will claim that there exist no stable boundaries between the monstrous, fragmented, machinic or cloned bodies ascribed to an allegedly post-human artistic trend and modern art more generally. Modern art as such is pervaded by these qualities. The wish to isolate a specifically post-human trend in recent art derives from a too concrete, science fiction-bound understanding of how technology transforms the human body, and from expecting this to be explained through an identifiable body seen from without. But why demand wires and gadgets to protrude visibly from a body that can with safety be categorized as android, when one of the shocks of the new is exactly that technologies become minuscule and extensive, pervade both material and immaterial spaces, are experienced just as much from standpoints within sensorial apparatuses as from without, and have consequences also when they are not directly sensed to be in action. If the post-human condition is indeed a reality gradually absorbing and transforming the whole of the human species and its habitats, it must be a shock of the new, having the widest thinkable ramifications, affecting every corner of global existence, most of them only barely conceivable, and therefore needing the radical artistic imagination of the avant-gardes to explore them. Our exposure of post-human qualities in modern art more generally has an important forerunner in the now largely forgotten or marginalized Verlust der Mitte from 1948 by Hans Sedlmayr. In spite of the Austrian art historian's pessimistic view of modern art as decadent, ill-stricken and perverse, a view to a certain extent catalyzed by his engagement in National Socialism and its denigration of modern art as degenerate, Sedlmayr delivered the still highly concise observation that modern art is marked by an away from the human, what he indeed termed a transhumanist escape from the classical middle of the Renaissance and Baroque, that is, the human body as a site for and reflection of the divine element in man. Since the French Revolution, Sedlmayr claimed, with a mixture of precision and pathos-soaked lament, art has increasingly depleted this scenic middle through an oscillation between extremes of rationality and irrationality, stiffness and fluidity, cold and heat, over-conservation and destruction, aerial escape from the earthy ground and descent into base matter. In parallel with movements in modern science from physics to evolutionary biology and psychoanalysis, art has converted architecture into machines and dehumanized painting into cold abstraction, at the same time as it has delved into all kinds of unbridled hallucinations, giving over to pre-, and extra-human domains inside and beyond the human body, the primitive, the childish, the subconscious, the mad, the animal, the superhuman, the inorganic. The sound middle of classical Western art, the organic organization of matter into a body reflecting the divine, is hereby dissolved into a demonic and nihilistic materialism, according to Sedlmayr. Despite his debatable denigration of modern art, Sedlmayr's basic characterization of it as infected by inhuman qualities appears astonishingly unobsolete, even fresh today, some 70 years later. Turning it upside down, we can even find a warning against contemporary transhumanist tendencies that just want to upgrade the human body according to human parameters we know all too well. Being young only for a longer time, being a muscular-driven autonomous body just stronger and faster, sensing from individual viewpoints just in higher and more swift resolution, etc. Although now being democratized and laid out for individual choice in fitness centers and perhaps soon birth clinics, these desires for perfecting the old human have troublesome reminiscences of the Nazi and also communist visions of the new human, a new classical autonomous body strengthened into Superman. What these popular transhumanist visions miss is the radically collective aspect of the post-human, the possibility of post-human existence as porous swarm being, an interface to near and remote parts of the world, as being interlaced with what was earlier bracketed out as environment. A more optimistic interpretation of techno-infiltrated trends of modern art is found in Jack Burnham's Beyond Modern Sculpture from 1967. Indeed, Burnham's seminal work aspires to be the first systematically post-humanist analysis of modern art, seeing it as a response to a stage in evolution in which technology outdistances biology. According to his suggested teleological theory, an irreversible technology, quote, destroys organic life and substitutes for it very sophisticated forms of synthetic life, unquote. Sculpture's 20th century movement from vitalist to machinic and systemic forms, from Brancusi to Nam June Paik, thus plays a part, quote, in shaping our destination as a post-human species, unquote. So both the futurists, Ortega y Gasset, Sedlmayr, and Burnham, could quite easily be built into an extended post-human historiography. The very work of extension could be done by combining the post-human with another historiography that likewise concerns the irreversible building together of the human and the non-human, namely the Anthropocene, the age emerging with the Industrial Revolution in which our technological production penetrates nature so profoundly that nature's and culture's histories become inseparable. So far, post-human and Anthropocene have acted eerily as each other's mirror versions. The post-human, especially in its transhuman guise, being about enhancement and nigentropic complexification of the body. The Anthropocene being about the breakdown of this body's surroundings because of all the entropic waste that is produced by the technology necessary to enhance the body. But so far, they have almost functioned as the two sides of the dog-rabbit figure. If you see the one, you can't see the other. I suggest that we'll see something really interesting if we manage to see both simultaneously. First, with its attention to the environment, the Anthropocene may catalyze a structural shift in focus of the post-human away from the autonomous body. As witnessed in modern art and sustained by Donna Haraway's extended understanding of the cyborg, the post-human concerns indeed a new and radical breakdown of human autonomy, dissolving the borders between body and surroundings, sensorium and surroundings, and mind and surroundings. Second, with its attention to ruination, pollution, waste, and entropy, the Anthropocene may catalyze a structural shift of focus away from an understanding of the post-human as a simple enhancement, perfection, and strengthening of the human body, In modern art, and sustained by considerations of complexity and entropy, we meet an extended repertoire of defigured, inorganic, random, or strictly ordered forms that makes it graspable that human genesis somehow integrates evolution towards further complexity with its seeming opposite, a decomplexification.